Greetings YouTube, Kudou here. Today we're going to be looking at Bushiroad's newest TCG experience, Luck and Logic. As you may have expected, this game's actually been out in Japan for quite a while, but it just came out here to the States, and I figured since they already gave a release date for the English release, I'd just wait for the English release to cover the game. In Luck and Logic, you'll be using two decks of cards, a white deck and a black deck. Oh, wait a second. Your goal is to attack and destroy face-down cards on your opponent's side of the board until they've lost all of the cards in their face-down area, each one having an effect when you flip it face-up. Rather than an attack and a defense stat, each character has a power in a base 1000. Their levels can range as high as level 4. Destroyed characters can be used as energy to pay for new characters. Luck and Logic was released alongside a shoujo anime to help promote the game. Okay, I ain't gonna say that Luck and Logic is a complete ripoff of Wixoss or anything, but I am saying that if you squint in a dimly lit room, it might be a little harder to tell them apart than Bushiroad would like you to realize. Definitely think there was a Wixoss fan in the development team, that's all I'm saying. To be fair though, Lurigs were pretty much just Vanguards from card fights, so I guess it all balances out. To learn how to play the game, we're going to use the awesome little quick sheet that Bushiroad provides for their games. At the top here, we've really just got some flavor text. Just to give some context, I haven't actually checked out the anime or anything about the lore, but so help me if somebody is trying to bone their brother. As I stated before, the main victory condition is to destroy your opponent's face-down cards. In this case, it's going to be gates. They're a little bit like a combination of lands from Magic the Gathering and shields from Kaijudo or Duel Masters. One thing that's unique about them here is their placement matters. You have a grid of 6 squares and your opponent can attack the 3 in front and then finally the 3 in back to win the game. Alternatively, there's also a lose condition. If you're forced to refresh your deck twice, then you pretty much lose the game, and I'll go into that a bit more detail later. You'll be playing with 2 decks, a main deck of 50 cards with 8 paradox cards, much like the climaxes from Wixoss, and you'll have a gate deck that represents the face-down cards your opponent is trying to destroy. A pretty fun thing to note here is you have a gate deck of 10 cards, but you have 6 spaces on your gate slot, so you won't always be guaranteed your most powerful gates. Next, let's take a look at some card types. We're going to start with the member cards, since they're the most important cards in the game. The stats here are pretty typical of most other games. They have a level telling you what point in the game they come out, they have a power saying how good they are in battle, they have effect text, and they have a couple of extras. The first thing I'd like to point out is there are 3 different kinds of members. There are Logicalists, Foreigners, and Transunions. Logicalists and Foreigners are the ones you'll be playing with the most. The only difference between them really is that Logicalists can play cards from their hands to power themselves up during a battle. You may be asking yourself, well, if they can do that and Foreigners can't do that, then why not just play with all Logicalists? Well, that's because you need a Logicalist and a Foreigner to create a Transunion, which is the most powerful type of card in the game. Next up are Tactics cards. Tactics cards are your basic spells, instants, sorceries. Although funnily enough, the way they're played here, you'd almost think they were like jutsus from Naruto, because normally they're going to be played during the battle phase. Next up are Paradox cards. Paradox cards are special. You can notice it because they're turned sideways just like the climaxes are in Wixoss. Each of them has some kind of special effect, but the main effect that all Paradox cards hold is that they change the battle from one of power to one of aura. This is special because if you know you're going to lose a battle in pure power and you can switch it to a battle of aura, then you might be able to raise your aura and stand a chance and win anyway. Last up are Gate cards. You'll have 6 gate cards on your side of the field, and each of them is represented by a number. You cannot have 2 cards of the same number in your gate deck. When you attack a gate that does not have a member standing on top of it, then the gate is flipped over, an effect is resolved, and that gate is considered to be destroyed. If all 6 of your gates are destroyed, then you lose the game. Next, we'll move on to arguably the most important part of the game, trancing. If you've played Yu-Gi-Oh at all, then the closest thing I can compare this to is Xyzing, but it's a lot more lenient than Xyzing. Once per turn, you can take 1 Logicalist and 1 Foreigner you have, combine them, and then search your deck for a Transunion, put it in play with the 2 cards under it. The 2 cards under the Transunion each give it plus 1000 power, making it a pretty powerful play. There are some other special things about trancing, but I'll get into that a little later. Here's your basic field setup. It's gonna look a lot like sort of a union between Vanguard and Wixoss for anybody else who follows Bushiroad games. There's not really a lot to go over here. It's gonna be a lot easier to just talk about the game. There are two more things we're gonna cover though before we get to the second half. Members each take up a certain number of spaces on your side of the field, whether it be 1 or 2, and whether they be a logicalist, a foreigner, or a transunion. The norm right now is that level 1s and 2s will stand on 1 gate card, while levels 3 and 4 will stand on 2 gate cards. This has been causing a little bit of confusion, so let me see if I can simplify it. Now, you have 6 gates on your side of the field. Imagine that as 6 spaces that you can play characters. The really powerful cards are so big that they need 2 gates in order to be played. They can stand either on 2 gates in a single column to protect both of the gates in that column, or they can stand in 2 gates that are standing next to each other so they're protecting 2 gates in a row. The one stipulation is that you cannot have them stand diagonally, because that would be ridiculous. Next up is deck refreshing. If you happen to run out of cards in your main deck, then you have to reshuffle the cards in your discard pile back into your main deck and then put the top card of your main deck into the removed from play zone. Having one card removed from play is okay, but if you happen to have to deck refresh again and put a second card there, you're immediately declared the loser of the game. Alright, time to get to some slightly meatier stuff. Starting the game is pretty standard fare. You and your opponent both shuffle your decks and your gate decks. You put 6 cards from the top of your gate decks down on the 6 circles on your side of the field. Roll a dice, flip a coin, or play rock, paper, scissors to see who goes first, and draw your hand of 5 cards. You can take any number of the cards in your opening hand, put them on the bottom of your deck, and then draw that many new cards. In regular, ridiculous Bushiroad fashion, there's something you're supposed to say before the fight, to signify that you are ready to begin the game. In this case, it's judge your logic. Gotta say, it's not quite as catchy as raise the flag, or stand up my Vanguard. The first thing you do during your turn is take all of your rested cards and make them standing. Then during your draw phase, you draw 2 cards from the top of your deck. You then take the top card of your deck and put it face down in your stock. Normally in games like this, the player who goes first skips their draw phase, but not here. Next up we have our level phase. You can choose to put a card from your hand face up and standing in your level zone. If you're the first player though, you play the card face down instead. This is important for later. It doesn't say it here, but if you happen to have 4 cards in your level zone, then you're at max capacity. However, during the level phase, if you do want to get one of the cards in your level zone back, you can choose to put 1 card from your level zone back in your hand and then play a new one from your hand in its place. You have to have a full max capacity of 4 cards in your level zone to do this though. Next up is your main phase. You can deploy members, move or swap member locations, use luck drives, use activated abilities, and then there are 2 special actions you can only do once per turn. First up is Trance. As I stated before, you can take 1 logicalist and 1 foreigner on your side of the field, combine them, and then search your deck for a transunion and put it in play with those 2 cards under it. In order to play a member to your side of the field, it has to have level equal to or lower than the number of cards in your level area, and this counts for transunions as well. If you happen to have a transunion in your hand, however, you can choose to play it as normal. However, keep in mind that it won't get the plus 2000 power boost from having a logicalist and a foreigner under it. The final thing you can do is use your logic drive. I'll go into a bit more detail with this later, but logic drives are a more powerful version of luck drives, and you can only use them once per turn. When you're done with your main phase, you get a battle phase, in which you have your cards on your side of the field attack cards on your opponent's side of the field. Now, the number of times you're allowed to declare an attack is equal to the number of face-up cards you have in your level zone. So, if you're going first, then the first card that you have in your level zone should be face down, and therefore you cannot attack. Every turn you will ideally be putting 1 card in your level zone, and therefore not only be able to play higher level cards, but also gaining more attacks per turn, eventually getting up to 4. Finally, we hit your end phase. If there's a paradox card in your paradox zone, then it goes to your drop zone, and then your turn is over. Any effects that said until the end of the turn or until the end of your turn are now deactivated. Now that we know the basics, let's go into a bit more detail. As I stated before, if during your level phase you decide to play a 5th card to your level zone, then you have to return one of the cards currently in your level zone back to your hand. Having a face down card in your level zone means you're down 1 attack, so if you're the player who went first, you'll want to do this as soon as possible. Next, let's move on to deploying members. To deploy a member, all you have to do is pay any of its costs and put it on an open spot on the field. At the beginning of the game, you won't have to worry about costs too much, but later on in the game, you will have to start paying things like stock and maybe even cards from your hand in order to play cards to the field. I want to reiterate that you can play TransUnions as normal cards without having to go into trancing. The stipulation here is that in order to play a TransUnion as a regular member, you have to have a face-up card in your level zone that's the same world or color. And of course, its level can't be higher than the number of cards in your level zone. While members are in play on the field, you can move around their position as you see fit. Do keep in mind though that the levels 3 and 4 that take up 2 spaces will still need to be able to stand on 2 spaces. You cannot make it impossible for one of your characters to not be on all of its fields. And finally, if your field is full, then you can put one of your characters in play in the drop zone and play a new character in its place. Next, we're going to get into trancing, and this has been the hardest thing for newbies to understand, but I'm here to tell you that it's not as complicated as it sounds. Once per turn, if you have a Logicalist and a Foreigner on the field, you can put them together, search your deck for a TransUnion and put it in play with those 2 cards attached to it and under it, showing that it has boosted power. Its level cannot be higher than the number of cards in your level area, and you do have to pay its deploy and cost conditions. The plus 1000 power per soul only takes effect when you attack, so if you're being attacked, then you don't get the power boost. Now, if you don't find the TransUnion you're looking for, or you just choose not to use any of the TransUnions you currently have in your deck, then you can force yourself into a deck refresh, pay the refresh penalty, and then choose a new card. This is costly, but it can be very useful if you're looking through your deck and you realize that all of the TransUnions that would actually help you are currently in your discard pile. Sometimes it's just better to take the refresh penalty to get the card you need. Just make sure you don't do this when you already have a card in your deck refresh penalty slot. And finally, the thing that is just driving everybody crazy when it comes to trancing is the TransUnions do not need to match the partner in soul. Just choose whatever TransUnion you like. Now let's get into the 2 drives. The luck drive is very simple. During your turn, you can put 3 cards from your stock into your discard pile to draw a card. You can do this as many times as you want to during your turn, so if you happen to have 9 stock, you can turn it into 3 cards. One thing about this game in particular is you will not be low on stock. You get stock from everything in this game, so don't be shy about using this if you really need to. Finally, we'll talk about the logic drive. Most TransUnions have an effect called a logic drive. In order to use Logic Drive, a TransUnion does have to have cards in its soul. If you played it normally and you don't have any soul, then it cannot use its Logic Drive. Logic Drives are much more powerful than Luck Drives, and therefore you can only use 1 per turn. So even if you do have 2 TransUnions in play that both have a Logic Drive, you can only choose one of their Logic Drives to activate per turn. Okay, let's get on to some combat, shall we? To declare an attack, rest one of your members and choose an opponent's circle to attack. If there's a member there, then you battle each other. If it's just a gate, then the gate is destroyed. You cannot attack circles in the back unless the circle in the front already has a destroyed gate on it. When a gate is destroyed, flip it face up and activate any effects. If the gate was already destroyed when the attack was declared, then nothing happens. Also, if you're attacking and destroying your opponent's very last gate, then they do not get its effect. It's flipped over and they're declared the loser of the game. Now, if the gate you attacked happened to have a member standing on it, then it starts a battle. After declaring your attack, your opponent can intercept. They can move any of their members to the intercept zone to gain their logic effect. Most of the time, it's going to be a logic that either raises their aura or their power. Next, we're probably going to move on to the most tangled part of the whole game, and that's the logic definition step. Don't be confused by the wording here, okay? I'm going to make it super easy for you. First, check the limit of the member that you have in battle to see if it can even use logic. You'll mainly be looking at logicalists for this. If there's a number in its limit, then you have some options during a battle. The first is you can take a card from your hand and put it face up in the battle zone. If it's a tactics card, then resolve the tactics effect. If it's a member with logic, then you can use its logic effects to make yourself stronger. A card's logic effect can be seen here. They'll either increase your power, your aura, or your limit. Power's the most common and the most useful one that you'll see, but sometimes you'll see ones like this that give you extra aura. Aura is important for aura battles that we'll probably get into later. There's also a logic that increases your limit, so you can play even more cards during the battle phase. Alternatively, you can choose to rest one of the cards in your level area to draw one card from your deck before defining your logic. The stipulation here is if you do this, you absolutely have to play a card from your hand to define your logic, even if it doesn't help you. Normally you'll want to do this as a last-ditch effort, or if it's your opponent's turn and they're attacking you and you have untapped cards in your level zone anyway. I mean, there's no reason to keep them untapped, so you might as well just get their effects. If you don't want to do either of these, you can choose to pass, but if you and your opponent both pass consecutively, then that's over, and you and your opponent can no longer define logic. You and your opponent do this back and forth until you both have cards in your battle zone equal to or lower than your character's limit. Next, we need to figure out who won the battle and who lost. We haven't really talked about paradox cards, so I guess now would be a pretty good time. One type of card you can define logic with is a paradox. The basics of a paradox card kind of break down like this. If you and your opponent both have a paradox card face up on your side of the field, whether it be in your battle zone or your paradox zone, then they're both flipped face down. If either player ever has two paradox cards on their side of the field face up, then they have to turn one of them face down and keep the other one face up. Paradox cards have their own individual effects when they come into play, so read them and do what they say, but their main quality is that if during the win-loss determination step there is one face-up paradox on your side of the field or your opponent's side of the field, then you perform the battle using aura instead of using power. The attacker wins ties in Luck and Logic, so if you and your opponent have the same number of aura or the same amount of power, then the attacker wins and the loser is destroyed. Destroyed characters are sent to the inner zone. If you attack and the defending player happens to have more aura or more power than you, then your attacking character is not destroyed. Attackers cannot be destroyed by attacking. If a TransUnion is destroyed and it still has soul, then all three of the cards are moved to the stock, and your opponent can choose what order to put them in when they put them in their stock. Once the winner and loser has been decided, then it's the end of that battle step. You put all the cards in the intercept zone into the drop zone, and if there happens to be a face-up paradox card, then it goes into the paradox zone. This is important because as long as that paradox remains face-up there in the paradox zone, then all other attacks this turn will be performed using aura instead of power. Let's take a look at some technical stuff before I give my final thoughts. These are the types of effects you're going to see, and I won't insult your intelligence by explaining them because they are pretty straightforward. These are the types of logic that you're going to see when it comes to the battle zone. There are increases in power, aura, and limit, as well as tactics cards and paradox cards, which we've already discussed. We're pretty much done, but let's take a look at an example battle just so you guys get a clear idea of what's going on. Chloe declares an attack. Chloe is 9,000 with 2 in the soul, so it becomes 11,000 with 3 limit. Our defender Tamaki here is losing at only 9,000 power, but because she has 3 limit and the defender gets to choose their logic first, she plays a logic plus 5,000 power from the hand. Tamaki is now at 14,000 power and has 2 limit left. Chloe also activates a power logic. She is now at 16,000 power with 2 limit left. It's Tamaki's turn to respond, and she has nothing in her hand, so she level boosts and draws into a power card. Now, because she level boosted, she has to play the card that she drew, so she puts it on the field. She's now at 19,000 power with 1 limit left. Chloe decides to respond with Paradox Logic. Now it's going to be fought in Aura instead of Power. The text of the Paradox card gives Chloe +1 Aura, so now it's 2 Aura versus 1, and Power is ignored. As we remember, Tamaki has no cards in hand, so decides to level boost again. She draws an aura because apparently Tamaki is the luckiest son of a bee in the world. Tamaki now has 3 aura with 0 limit left. Chloe still has 1 limit left, so there's still a chance for her to get that last aura. She decides to play a limit +2 logic. She can now choose to take 2 more turns when defining logic. So she level boosts into an aura logic and plays it. She now has 4 aura against her opponent's 3 aura and is declared the winner. So yeah, let's talk about this game, guys. First, I kind of want to get the anime out of the way. Now, as I said before, I haven't actually seen the anime, but Vanguard was pretty good, Buddy Fight was okay, so I have no doubt that it's at least a competent anime. In fact, as a bonus, this looks like an anime that's trying to appeal to a more feminine audience, so this might actually increase Bushiroad's audience a little bit. There are tons of female Weiss players, and there's a pretty moderate amount of Vanguard female players, but I haven't really seen any female buddy fighters. I'll probably check this anime out at some point and get back to you, but for right now, all I can say is it looks okay, probably not anything you need to get into the card game. And, I hate to keep harping on about this, but it doesn't look quite as influential as the Wixoss anime. Now let's talk a bit about the game itself. The game feels a little stitched together. That's not necessarily a bad thing. I think that in order for us to progress, we have to sort of take and cherry pick ideas that are good, put them together, and then add some new elements to make them even better. That's the only way that games are truly going to thrive, is to take good ideas and make them even better by adding new things. Elements of this game just feel so familiar, and that's both a good thing and a bad thing. We have the logic battles, which are arguably the most, I say like the biggest development, but honestly, it feels a lot like battles in like Naruto or spells on the stack from Magic the Gathering. Now, I'm not saying that the idea isn't completely unique, okay? It is unique for a Bushiroad card game, and I feel like this game is a very good answer to people who feel like Bushiroad games are more about luck than they are actual strategy. In fact, I'd say probably the best thing that this card game has going for it is the fact that it doesn't feel quite as luck-based as some of Bushiroad's other games. When you win a battle in Luck and Logic, it truly feels like you've outsmarted your opponent. That's not to say that there's no luck in it whatsoever, because every card game has luck and needs a small element of luck. But when you compare it to other card games in Bushiroad's library, then this game does take a lot more skill than something like Wixoss or Vanguard. The game is also slightly more complex than another game like Vanguard. It feels like there's so much going on with this game, like there's a lot of different elements that you have to keep track of, and this can be a good thing or a bad thing. The great thing about something like Cardfight Vanguard is it's really easy to get somebody else into it because there's only one card type, and it's very, very easy to play the game. Games are a pretty moderate amount of time, like 10 to 15 minutes, so it doesn't take too long, and it's not too fast like Buddy Fight. Luck and Logic takes about as much time as a Weiss-Schwarz match, if not a little bit more. I do think that the game is a lot of fun, and there's just enough player feedback to keep you entertained during your turn, and looking forward to your turn when it's your opponent's turn. Despite all the jokes about this game taking from a bunch of other card games, and Wixoss in particular, the game does feel like it comes together as a cohesive whole, and from what I understand, it has been doing kind of well in Japan. I think the game does have what it needs to survive, but I'll get into that in a second. In comparison to some of Bushiroad's other card games, I don't think this is necessarily my favorite Bushiroad card game, as a lot of other people are stating it is. I feel like Buddy Fight actually was a much better leap out of Bushiroad's comfort zone than this game. Like, say what you want about Buddy Fight, alright? Buddy Fight feels like a very unique, fast-paced, and refreshing experience. It's not only unlike most other Bushiroad games, but it's unlike a lot of other games on the market, because games are just so quick-paced, you can get through them very easily. The cards have a very sort of old 90s B anime sort of thing going for it. It actually used an attack and a defense system along with a damage system. Everything about Buddy Fight felt like Bushiroad taking fresh new ideas and making them feel familiar. As much as I do love Luck and Logic, and I am excited to play a few matches with some people in local shops if I can find it, I don't feel like it's quite as innovative as Buddy Fight was. Sorry, guys. The last thing I want to do is go into my thoughts on this game's survivability. Now, Bushiroad has this sort of weird problem going for it, where it cannibalizes its own games. The one problem I see here is I think people are going to be jumping into this game either as an alternative to Vanguard, or they're going to have to choose between this and Vanguard. And the problem there is Vanguard already has such a huge following behind it. I don't know necessarily if this game is going to compete with itself. I know hardcore LNL fans are going to be all over me saying this game is unique and I should stop comparing it to other games, and it doesn't matter if it's like other games, so on and so forth, yakety smackety. I do think this is a strong game, and I do think it's going to have its audience, but I think it's going to have the same effect as Force of Will, where it's not going to be a whole lot of players that play it, but the players that do play it are going to be very hardcore about it. So it's not necessarily going to be very widespread like a game like Pokemon or the like, but I think that the fan base that it does get is going to be a lot more hardcore than you find for something like Vanguard or Buddy Fight. Another huge problem this game has going for it here in the West is the fact that Weiss Schwarz is starting to really take off. People are taking Weiss Schwarz seriously as a card game now, and Weiss Schwarz is not necessarily a cheap hobby to get into, so shelling out money for another Bushiroad card game might be a little difficult at this point. Ironically, I just feel like the success of Bushiroad's other card games is going to stop this from becoming a very widespread game. If you're interested in this game and you want to look more into it, then here's what I recommend doing. Now that the game is out in English, trial decks should be pretty easy to come by. There are currently 2 trial decks out right now. I think it's called Brave Logic and Rene Logic. So pick the one that you like. I'll probably go into a sort of deck analysis of them later if you have trouble deciding. And just carry a trial deck around with you. Buying the trial decks will show Bushiroad that there's some interest in the game, but I wouldn't necessarily start spending money on booster packs or really expensive decks yet, because I don't want anybody to get screwed. I had this problem with, I think, my Buddy Fight review, where I told people not to necessarily go out. No, it was Luck and Logic. No, not Luck and Logic. I'm stupid. Sorry. It was Force of Will. I told people not to necessarily spend a bunch of money on Force of Will immediately, because I didn't want anybody to get screwed. But a lot of people came back against me and said that that's not showing the company enough love and support. But here's my thing. I think you can support a company without dumping $100 into it. So I think if everybody goes out and buys a trial deck, then we can all have some fun with the trial decks. They seem pretty balanced. And if this game does pick up and you really want to get into it, then it should be pretty cheap to get a competitive deck going. I just don't want you, as a consumer, as one of my fans, to get screwed, because this game has a potential, a very high potential, I hate to say, to stagnate and die off. Not saying it's going to, guys, but the numbers are there that this game has a potential to, and we have to take that into consideration. If you enjoyed this video, please leave it a like. Those things really do help us out. If you have any thoughts on Luck and Logic or suggestions on what I should cover next, then please leave them in the comments section below. And finally, as always, subscribe to stay up to date on the latest Kudou news. Judge your logic, nerds.